as leaders, telling the truth to those who are entitled to that truth is one of the key facets of developing trust in relationships.
Hello, and welcome to Working with me, Dan Doriani, hosting a podcast where we explore faith, work, culture, and the way believers can make a difference in their corner of the world. I'm delighted to have Tom Gibbs, my friend, with us today. He's not here because he's my friend. He's here because he was an RUF campus minister very successfully in Baylor University, or at Baylor University, not a bastion of Presbyterianism, shall we say. Baptist school, grew, and then he planted a church in San Antonio, starting with essentially nobody, like 3 people, which grew to close to 1,000 people, which is a very good track record over a span of time. Now he's the president of Covenant Theological Seminary. Tom, I am glad to have you here. Did I mess up the introduction in any way? What do you want to say about yourself?
No, that's perfect, Dan. It's great to be with you. Excited to share.
Okay, great. So one of the first things I want to talk about a little bit is San Antonio.
Yeah.
And you planted a church in the most, possibly the most ethnically diverse or different from the rest of the country city in America. And the numbers I have, which you may want to adjust a little bit, are roughly 2/3 Hispanic, maybe 25% European, maybe 7% African American, maybe 3% others. That's
these statistics are close. Yeah,
unusual demographic in America. And you planted a church that's diverse, not maximally diverse, but pretty diverse. And tell me, you're a European descent person. You planted a church in a very non-Anglo city. Just tell us a few things about what you did, why you did it, why it worked.
Well, part of why we came to San Antonio was our love for the culture and love for the city, love for the place. San Antonio, like maybe a city like New Orleans, it has a distinctive culture and sense of itself that is both attractive. It's a tourist destination, but it also informs everybody's lives. All the people who live there are shaped by that culture, unique history, and the demographic makeup of the city. That was a draw to us immediately about planting there. But like other cities, San Antonio has pockets where its diversity is greater or less. And we wanted to be at the intersection of that diversity, and so we sought to
physically.
Right, so we sought to plant in the middle of the city, downtown, so that we could not only use the resources of the majority Anglo culture we might think of in terms of power and wealth, but to serve the majority population of Latinos and Hispanics who perhaps were at disadvantages in other ways. And we wanted to be a church where there was this involvement of that racial and wealth and educational diversity all intersecting together.
Yeah. That does connect somewhat to your serious academic studies. Your doctorate is in leadership studies. Certainly starting an RUF campus ministry from zero as a Presbyterian with Baptist takes some leadership skills. Planting a church in a major city with essentially, just a tiny handful of people takes some leadership experience. So how you did it on a campus, you did it in a church. How did your leadership studies translate to something new for you, and that is leading a seminary? And it's not the easiest thing to lead seminaries right now.
Leading in any setting is challenging, Dan, as you know that too. It's funny, when I think about my ministry journey, I never thought of myself as a leader. I thought of myself as a pastor. And then looking back, discovered the task of leadership was so fundamental to everything I was doing. And I think that's true for many pastors, is we discover, as we thought we were called to being pastors, and we discovered, well, part of that is being a leader. And so we have to develop and grow and hone those skills associated with leading. So part of my journey in San Antonio was all about that. It was about learning how to lead the church that God had graciously allowed us to plant. And that led me back to Covenant Seminary to do a doctorate, actually, in leadership, because I was very much wanting to understand how to tackle and navigate the challenges I was facing at a growing church.
Well, and it's one thing to lead a church that's brand new and you're the only pastor and there's 72 people and they're all there because they love you. And it's another thing to lead a church that has 400 people and a lot of them are there because maybe you're the only option in that geographical locale and maybe they're used to leading things. And when you go from 70 to 200 to 400 to 800, that's almost a different church, and you lead in different ways. I think that's my take.
Oh, absolutely. That's probably 4 different churches.
Yeah, right.
And you have to be 4 different types of pastors in that progression of growth.
And it took you a couple of weeks to learn about that.
Yeah, it took a little bit.
Well, you made a great point a minute ago, and that is, and we talk about that on this podcast from time to time, and that is that people don't always know what their gifts are, and they don't always know what needs to emerge. But as they go through their life, people label it for them. You're better at this than you may realize. Or they simply say, hey, would you like to do this? Which means I see an ability in you that you might not see as clearly as I, an older person, see. I like to say that all leaders are talent scouts, and they see things in people. You want to comment?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of leadership is talent selection because part of what you're doing as a leader is building a team. In Osborne's book, Sticky Teams, he talks about organizational growth in terms of being the track star leader, and then being the golfing buddies, and then being the basketball club, and then being the the full football team or the full soccer team or whatever it is, where you have multiple position players and
just in case there are people who don't understand metaphors.
Yeah.
A track star goes as fast as he or she possibly can. Doesn't matter if anybody's with him or not.
Yeah.
In fact, the ideal is to not have anybody near you because you're leading everybody else and they're in your dust.
Right.
And those others are moving farther and farther away from track star.
There are certain tasks that we can do as leaders that require just ourselves.
Right.
Right. We can
That's
be
the track star.
We can be track stars. But most settings for pastors and ministry leaders require the development of teams and development of thick relationships as we move through accomplishing tasks. And so the challenge of the leader is to be able to do that relational work well, even as they're seeking to accomplish significant things. And so oftentimes leaders think, well, they're those who accomplish significant things, or they are those who build significant relationships.
Yeah.
The truth is the best leaders do both.
Yeah, right. No question about that. I remember being very impressed by a leadership expert that I read, I'm going to say 3 years ago. And he said, leaders often get swamped by the events that just land on their desk and the emails that come in and the requests and the phone calls and the text messages. And it's just do what's kind of thrown in front of you. And this leadership expert said, you can let a lot of emails go unanswered if you identify 1 or 2 key things you have to do in your organization and you get them done. And a lot of little things can go wrong if you get the really big stuff right. Now, not everybody says that. I realize that. But having that in the back of my mind, when I watched you come about 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago to Covenant Seminary, it seemed like you had a couple big things you wanted to get done.
As leaders, you're constantly sifting priorities. You're constantly assessing and evaluating what's top of mind, what's on the front burner, what needs to be addressed. And I think that leaders can grow in the skill of discerning those things.
Those things that really matter.
Those things that really matter. I think leaders who try to relate to all things as if they are equally important are going to get distracted. But at the same time, it's possible for us to do a poor job of assessing what's most important. And we end up focusing on the wrong things. So it's not just picking one or two things.
You can do a great job at doing the wrong thing.
Right. So it's not just about picking one or two. It's not just about focus. It's about discernment. We have to discern what are those things that are mission critical. And mission critical is different at different points in an organization's life. So one of the things I had to do when I came to Covenant was evaluate where are we in this institutional moment. So
that in its history, let's say 100-year history, 200-year history, perhaps, where are we?
Yeah, where are we? That's the number one assessment that we have to determine. Are we at a place of turning around? Are we a place of ramping up, to use the language of the SWOT analysis? Are we at maintain? And so in each of those settings, the leader has to do different things.
Well, you had to do. I mean, it was very clear when you started at Baylor that you had essentially, 2 or 3 people. And
you mean in San Antonio?
Sorry. Well, no. Well, at Baylor.
Baylor was slightly different.
That's right. You had some people there. I'm sorry. I forgot.
So the ministry, when we started at Baylor, because we had strong commitment from a few Presbyterian churches, where we had students were, as students do across college campuses, they were excited about RUF.
Okay.
So we had 200 people at our first RUF.
So you went from 0 to 200. You're like one of those cars that goes from 0 to 100 in 3.2 seconds.
But it was crazy. But
okay,
it happened.
So it seemed as though you started from scratch. You started with 200. That's very different from starting a church with essentially nobody.
Yeah.
Which is very different. You could talk about this for hours, I'm sure, but maybe just hit 1 or 2 points that you would have for people in leadership. This is not for just you and me. This is for people listening on the difference between a startup and stepping in the middle of a stream.
Yeah. Well, startups always have the luxury of the grand dream, right? And the idea that you can sort of orchestrate the future the way you want it.
Because you're not correcting anybody's
that's right.
habits, mistakes, tradition. There are no traditions you have to counteract.
I always say the difference between doing church revitalization and church planting is the church revitalization is that you inherit baggage, but the church planter makes their own baggage.
I knew you were going to say that.
And
that's right.
And that's really true.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, after 10 years or 5 years even in a church plant, you have institutional baggage that you have to navigate.
May not be written down anywhere.
Yeah, but you probably had a big hand in all of it.
Yeah, you probably created whether you meant to or not.
Whether you meant to or not.
Right.
But in terms of coming to an institution that's 70 years in life, assessing that institutional history and understanding it is just a huge priority, and it's very different when you step into the stream, as you say, than when you start.
Yeah, let's just hit that a little bit. It's not just that you're stepping into an institution that has a history and a stream and baggage and so forth, but you also stepped into a change-resistant part of the world. That is to say, everybody knows educational institutions are highly change-resistant. Churches are highly change-resistant. And guess what? You got to be at the intersection of the church and an educational institution. How do you lead a change-resistant organization? Again, I'm not asking you to say everything, just a couple things for people.
So one of the things that I've come to understand about myself, Dan, why do I find myself in these environments? Because I've always been in environments that somebody told me, you probably can't do that. I had people say, why are we putting a Presbyterian ministry on a Baptist campus?
Right.
No one can plant a church in San Antonio, Texas. And often the challenges that I heard from my peers as a non-academic, why are you going?
You don't have a PhD.
Why are you going to go
You have
to
that
seminary?
other kind of doctorate.
Yeah, so this isn't where you belong. But so there's something within me that's drawn to the creative and the opportunity and the challenge of actually learning the answer to that question. So in one sense, I would answer that question by saying, how do you do that? I'm learning how to answer that question right now on the job. But as I'm going about that learning task, I know that it's bringing all of the experiences that I've had in ministry. I'm able to bring those to bear here. But in a change-resistant culture, academia, theological institutions, I'm learning all about those things. But what I am also observing is that people run these institutions just like people run other institutions.
Although you do have a profit imperative in the for-profit world. And so, if you're not making money, you have to do stuff to change things. And in a not-for-profit, there's no profit imperative. And as long as you're barely squeaking by, the mandate to make money or die just isn't there. It's harder.
Yeah, it's easier, I think, in the not-for-profit world and maybe even academia for institutions to avoid dealing with the hard questions.
There we go.
It's easier for them to avoid dealing with the hard questions to a point. But at some point, the hard questions have to be started to wrestle with. And so when I came to Covenant Seminary, those were some of the things that I had to from day one.
Yes.
I realized that we had some hard things to attend to.
This sounds like a terrific moment to have a micro break and keep people on the edge of their seat to find out what we're going to say about addressing hard questions. We're going to have a little break. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm John Perkins, Executive Director of the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. You've been listening to our podcast, Working with Dan Doriani. The Center also offers conferences on faith and work throughout the United States. Our goal is to equip formal and informal leaders to make a difference in their corner of the world. We equip Christian leaders to run 10-hour faith and work cohorts on 3 continents. Please visit our website at faithandworkstl.org to see how your church or organization can form a faith and work cohort for people who have, or aspire to, a leadership role in their workplace. Now, back to Dan.
Our topic at the moment is dealing with hard questions. And as you know, Tom, and I told you I was going to say this, one of the things I like about you so much is that you're a very carefully honest person. I believe you excel at that. I'm so grateful for it. I really do. Tell us what your approach is to truth-telling when it's hard and is essential. You don't say hard things just for the fun of it, right? You don't tell people, I hate your haircut. You say hard things when it must be done, which you do. What's your approach to that? How do you guide yourself in that task?
So, yeah, I don't know if I have a complicated answer to that question. I feel like as God's people, as believers, we're called to be truth tellers. And God calls us to be honest. And yet we also have to be honest within certain contextual realities. So we don't tell everything to everybody because not everybody needs to hear everything.
It'd be bad leadership to tell everything to everybody.
Absolutely. But as leaders, telling the truth to those who are entitled to that truth is one of the key facets of developing trust in relationships. So if we want to have trusting relationships, then we need to be informed about what's actually happening. And sometimes that's good news. Oftentimes, though, the task of the leader is to share the difficult news. Marty Linsky, Harvard researcher, leadership guru, maybe you've read some of his books. He articulates the task of leadership. So he comprehends the whole task of leadership as disappointing others at a rate they can absorb.
Yeah, that's a great line.
So, which is getting right to the point.
Can you say that again, because it's so good? I know it's not your quote, and then maybe make sure we understand what that means. Go ahead, just say that.
Marty Linsky, disappointing others at a rate they can absorb. That is the task of leadership.
And what does it mean to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb?
So first of all, the concept of disappointment is sharing with your constituencies, whatever their particular place is in the institution, the truth about what's happening.
Which is the track team is going away.
Yeah. Sometimes it's this, for example, the pastor, the ministry team, or that particular priority is morphing. And I had to do that as a pastor in San Antonio many times. When we share that news, it brings with it a certain disappointment. Mm-hmm. But the art or maybe the improvisational craft of leadership is doing that at a pace that the institution and the constituencies can process without just completely shutting down.
Without being overwhelmed.
Or reacting in some sort of
anger
or sabotage.
Right.
And so that's the key of the leader, to do that well. And so we talked about how do you decide what's important? And I said, well, every leader's got to focus. And it's not just about picking, it's about discernment. But part of that process, too, is pacing. Mm-hmm. So the more important things that you do as a ministry leader, one of the things I've learned is the slower it often takes, because the disappointment, the loss, the conflict.
Because you're not sprinting.
Yeah.
You're taking the soccer team or the football team.
Yeah, you're playing the long game. Now, that's not to say that you're being unintentional. But being intentional about the pace is very much a part of the leadership task.
So you said something I agree with, but people 3 or 4 minutes ago might have said, ooh, you said giving people the truth that they're entitled to. The word entitled, of course, is a dirty word today.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said
that. It's almost like a 4-letter word. But you mean something very serious. I'm going to tell you what I think you meant.
Yeah.
If you have a certain responsibility, you must be given the information to do that job. And that may be very difficult or confidential information. If you are not in a position of leadership and you don't have to make big decisions, you do not need to hear difficult information. And so entitled means not entitled because of some privilege you never earned, but because of your role in an organization, whatever that role might be. I'm thinking that's what you meant by that.
Absolutely. So we can only answer that question in terms of what is appropriate to one's role.
Exactly.
And for example, in an academic institution, I have to pay a lot more attention to this question than I did even as a pastor.
Sure.
Because of HIPAA laws and all kinds of.
Oh, I thought you were saying because the faculty's also smart.
Yeah, well, that's true, But the point is there are laws governing what can and can't be shared. So those laws are just part of a bigger conversation of how we relate to information. And sometimes, as Americans, we want to live in a very flat organizational kind of world where everybody has access to the same
all
amount
the
of information.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And there's something beautiful about the internet and all the access we have to so much information. But still, as we lead and bring our organizations along, there's certain things that need to be attended to.
Sometimes you love somebody and they say, hey, what happened? And there are two answers that are actually legitimate to that. One is none of your business. You don't say it that way, but you say, yeah, that's just not germane for the conversation we're going to have here, that it's not a concern to you. It doesn't touch you in any way. Okay, I can tell you're troubled. I am, but we're not going to talk about it. Or you can withhold information out of love, not because of supercilious haughtiness. I can handle the truth, you can't, in that famous, you can't handle the truth, which is despising or contemptuous. It's an act of love to say, you know what, I'm not going to tell you the story I just heard because it would just grieve you. And I don't want to grieve you. It's just a sad, sad tale. I'm not going to tell you that sad, sad tale because I don't want it to burden you. So we all have to be guardians of the truth. Let's move on to something.
Can I? Yeah, I just want because
you sure can.
Because this goes to the heart of something that leaders all have to navigate, and that is how do we manage the burden or the task of leadership? And you just indicated a couple of ways that leaders often fall into. They can fall into contempt or anger or oversharing. They can be reactive and triangulate with other people that they shouldn't. And leaders are constantly navigating the burden of what it means to be in this chair. The way in which leaders can push back or lean into that challenge is through what the literature describes as differentiation. Edwin Friedman, Murray Bowen, many others have since talked about the priority for the leader to have a differentiated presence.
Meaning I'm more than my work, among other things, but keep going. What does differentiation mean?
I think the primary idea of differentiation is the leader has a self that is separated from the surrounding environment, not controlled by it, and yet can stay connected in meaningful ways. So that news that you get maybe in the counseling session or at the meeting, and you kind of want to wear that on your sleeve.
It doesn't, but you do not let it overwhelm you.
But you don't let it overwhelm you.
Even if you say, you know what, I need to go get a drink.
That's right.
And you may not be thirsty at all, but you need to get a drink for other reasons.
Right.
To calm yourself, purge that thought. You just found out somebody's angry at you for some tiny little joke that 500 people thought was hilarious, but 7 people thought it was just belittling to for some reason they're upset.
Right.
Like, you can't even make a joke around here. I don't want that to be on my mind as I move into the next meeting.
Right. And so that's the internal dialogue that the leader is constantly negotiating. And if we negotiate that well, that helps us in the leadership task. If we struggle in that, and we all leaders,
everybody's going to struggle.
Everybody struggles.
Right.
But if we get overwhelmed, then we're going to be reactive in our surrounding relationships. And the
previous hour will leak into the present hour, and you'll not focus as you should.
And so that sabotages us. So that's just anyway, just another thought.
That's good. Thank you. That's important material to think about. So we kind of covered this, but we didn't completely. Is there anything more you want to say about the topic of taking over midstream? Because no matter how good a leader is, no leader ever departs from a calling without leaving some unfinished business, right? When I've moved into leadership posts, I face unfinished business from the previous person. No matter how much I love them and respect them, there's unfinished business. You have had to do that too. How do you take up unfinished business constructively? We've kind of hit that, but what else do you want to say that we that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
Well, we talked about the importance of assessment, focus, building trust. And I think building trust, there's many different facets to that. So it's not just about being a person of your word. It's also about, are you casting a vision that resonates with the people around you?
And adjusting it if you need to.
That's right.
Right.
So there's an aspect of flexibility. There's a contextual aspect of that. If you come into midstream an organization and you change the vision dramatically and significantly, you're going to have a reaction.
Especially if you don't have any allies.
That's right. So trust is related to the task of building vision and casting vision. Because if you have a great vision, that's fine. But if nobody else joins you in that vision, you won't get anything done.
One of the ways, and I've seen you do this, one of the ways you can recast a vision is by saying, I'm not saying you said this verbatim, but akin to this. We have this in one of our foundational documents. And can I just make sure we all remember that this is in our foundational documents? Because, it's so easy to forget what's in our foundational documents from time to time. So you can appeal to the best of the past that might have been forgotten. So that when you're redirecting, you're not giving a 180 on your say-so. You're maybe moving things, and you can comment on how far you want to move things and how fast. You never want to do 180. Is it 40, 60, 90? How much can you move things? But you want to say, I have allies in the past. Our board, our founders have said these things.
Every leader is looking for the places where they find resonance, those things that are going to help them understand or help others understand where they want to go. Mm-hmm. So your history is key. Informal and formal leaders in the institution are also really important. But I think the most important thing the leader does is build relationships with existing stakeholders in the system. So
they can be formal or informal leaders. Can you I want to make sure everybody knows what a formal and an informal I've talked about it here from time to time.
I'm using lingo,
No, it's fine.
Fine. But a formal stakeholder would be somebody who has an official role in the institution.
Like a president, vice president, whatever.
A faculty member, a staff person, any person with an official role in the institution has a certain level of influence.
Formal
influence.
And then there's informal.
And informal would be somebody who may be a faculty member who is not just a faculty member, but they have a very prominent role outside of the institution, maybe through their writing or their speaking. And if they speak about the institution, it carries extra weight.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean they're better. The other person just may be 37 years old, and they've only been at the institution for 2 years.
We have this in all of our institutional life.
Mm-hmm.
There's every student at the high school is worth the same thing, but one student is the most popular. And so
one student can change a class for the better.
That's right.
But just say, knock it off, listen to the teacher, folks.
That student has informal, they're not just a student, but they have influence. So that's the concept of informal authority.
In the church, if I can just label this for everybody's benefit, if you're an elder listening, no matter how much authority pastors have, a respected elder is one of the most important voices in a church, because the respected elder is going to be there 20 more years, maybe has been there 20 years. The pastor is probably going to be there less than 40 years. And that elder, or maybe somebody who doesn't have a formal office, just can stand up and say, folks, we got to go this direction.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So Dan, going back to the question about midstream, when I came to Covenant, I actually was super excited about the mission and vision of Covenant. This is why I came here in the first place. It's why I came back. But so I didn't talk so much about vision early on, but I did talk about behaviors. Because we tend to think that organizations are built around visions, and organizations need visions, but they're actually built around people.
And culture.
And people who do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
for good or for ill.
They interact with each other. So behaviors are far more indicative of what happens in an organization than a vision.
Do you mean to tell me if you have a perfect vision statement and people ignore it, the vision statement doesn't do much of anything?
I'm kind of saying that.
You're kind of saying. And if people have a great vision statement everybody votes for, and then they intentionally or unintentionally sabotage it, the vision might as well be set on fire.
That's right.
Yep. Okay.
So
just to be clear about where we stand on this.
So great organizations have more to do with organizational health than they do a vision statement. And so when I came to Covenant, I emphasized 4 different behaviors that I was going to keep talking about. I still talk about them. But one was trust. We've talked about that. Another one was clarity.
That has to do with truth-telling.
Right, clarifying, but it wasn't just clarifying like what my stances were. It was about clarifying roles, relationships within the institutions.
How we behave in those relationships.
And responsibilities. So I wanted to clarify, and that wasn't just for me. That's for all of us. Among some of our leaders at the seminary, we say clarity is kindness, and there's a lot of truth to that. When we know what is our responsibility, it helps everybody. So clarity.
It keeps people from over-functioning, bearing burdens they shouldn't bear, which then means that they don't do as well as they should at their foundational or fundamental task.
Yeah.
You had 2 more?
2 more. So collaboration, which I think sometimes we think of collaboration as consensus. And
we don't think that, though.
And when I think about consensus, I think everybody agrees. And if you're in an organization and everybody has to agree, then
means
inevitably you will do the least offensive, the least exciting, the least dynamic thing because
one person may vote against it.
Right. So collaboration is not consensus. Collaboration is meaningful engagement with others around the task or around the responsibility you're seeking to do.
My view on collaboration versus consensus is you don't want to proceed if the vote was a 52 to 48, but you don't need to hold out for 100 either. I think a lot of votes you're fine if it's 70%. Some you might need 80%, but I don't think you need 100% for much of anything, because there's always going to be somebody who sees things a different way.
Yeah, so in the literature, oftentimes people quote, I think this was a principle at Intel, the corporation, and it's simple, disagree and commit. So the job of the team was to make sure all the ideas and all of the objections were voiced. Right? Everybody got everything out on the table. And then once the decision had been made, then you commit, you move forward.
And if you can't commit, start looking for another job.
There you go.
Number 4 was?
And the final one is accountability.
Yeah, right.
So that's the notion of we do need to not just be known and valued in our roles. We need to be coached to see, hey, how are we performing? Is this actually working?
Am I doing as well as I think?
Yeah.
Maybe better, maybe not as good.
And that's not just for the people in the institution. That's for me as the president, and that's for the institution, to our denomination. That concept that we are stewards unto a higher authority, that we have a responsibility, is fundamental to doing things well.
The organization does not exist to perpetuate itself.
Yeah, that's true.
We're going to move over toward a question about the moment we're in. 2020s, early 2020s were a very difficult period for churches and seminaries. It's not as difficult as it was. There are a lot of signs of turnaround. What's your appraisal? It is at this moment, spring of 2024.
Well, I think it's still hard for us to assess the impact of COVID and the macro trends that are happening in the culture related to Generation Z and how they're processing the Christian faith. I wouldn't read too much into like a snapshot into this moment. What we do know is that COVID led people away from church and attendance at worship. And so we're waiting to see whether or not we're going to have people coming back. And I do think we're seeing people come back, and that's encouraging. The macro trend, though, suggests otherwise, that we're seeing we continue to see the secularization of the church, particularly in Gen Z, now regarding itself, I guess, one of 2 in this generation, identifying as a spiritual nun, which doesn't mean they don't have faith. It just means they're not identifying with any particular faith tradition. And so the impact of that on the church, I think, is still unfolding. But what we do see is where churches have their voice and they do have thick, rich relationships, we're seeing those churches continue to flourish. I think this is one of the reasons why, in the face of these broader macro trends, the PCA is still a denomination that's...
PCA is the Presbyterian Church in America.
The Presbyterian Church in America is growing, actually, at a small percentage, but growing, which is a significant outlier culturally. But I think that speaks to not only the distinctive identity that we celebrate in the Presbyterian Church in America, but it also speaks to our commitment to mission, our commitment to ministry. Those both are critical if we're going to push back on these macro trends in the culture.
Oh, I know you have more to say. We did not talk, and we're not going to talk because we've done it in other podcasts about the effect of politicization on the church and Gen Z. But we are going to move to quicker questions. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
You got your 60-second or less hat on?
Okay, I'm ready.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. Number 1. You're on an elevator with a young Christian who wants to be a leader. You got 78 stories, but the elevator moves pretty fast. Dr. Gibbs, you're a leader. I'll look up to you. Give me a word or two of wisdom. You got 45 seconds.
45 seconds, that's not enough because I like to know
you
people's
just wasted
stories.
10 seconds.
I know. So I'm going to have to push through and figure out how to gain a few more minutes.
But if you had 45 seconds.
45 seconds, I would say go slower. God is not in a hurry.
Okay.
Be curious and stay in the Word.
Okay, that's good. That's kind of like listen, take your time. That's good. Number 1. Number 2, tell me who a couple of your heroes in leadership are.
I mean, I think the people that have impacted my life in terms of ministry leadership are not celebrities
They don't have to
or
be
personalities.
celebrities. Was it a pastor, a coach?
Coaches and pastors in my life.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They invested in you.
People that invested in me.
That's good.
Those are the people that I could say their names, but none of your listeners would know
That's
them.
fine. My favorite leader was a guy named Willard McMillan, who was only famous to people who knew him. But he's beloved by people who knew him. That's for sure. Okay, if the time machine is working just fine and you can look into the future, what would you like to be celebrating in 5 years?
Oh, I would love to be celebrating Covenant Seminary being the most exciting training institution for future ministry leaders and pastors and counselors.
That's a great answer. I love that answer. If whatever age you are, I'm going to say you're 50, low 50s, whatever age you are, could go back and talk to the 35-year-old Tom Gibbs, what would 50-something Tom Gibbs say on the elevator, 45 seconds, what would he say to the young 35-year-old Tom Gibbs?
Slow down.
Okay, that's it.
He would say, slow down. He would say, take your time. He would say, become curious. And he would say, God is not in a hurry. God is not in a hurry.
I think you said that already once.
Yeah. I was talking to my younger self.
Okay, that's good. That's
there
good.
You go.
Last question. Now, you can ask me a question or say, I want to answer one more question if you want to, but it has to be 60 seconds or less.
Yeah.
My last question for you is, if logistics were no obstacle at all, what would you do for a year?
Wow. Well, I probably, you actually told me this question before we started. So my first thought was I would want to go to Montana and fly fish for 6 months. I would love to do that.
That's a good answer, yeah.
And then I would probably want to spend the next 6 months traveling the major cities of the world.
Prague, London, Paris?
I have not been to Prague, but yeah, in Europe as well as South America and Africa.
All right.
Yeah, that's what I would want to do. I love to travel. I love to see these cities and the different cultures. That's a huge privilege I get to do.
Almost ready to sign off, but is there anything else you want to hit before we go?
No, I'm here for you. I'd love to hear another question.
I don't have any more questions right now.
You're done.
I'll have to invite you back in 4 years.
That sounds great, Dan. I
All
love
right.
that.
Hey, Tom, it's been great to have you. Thank you for all that you do and much more for all you are. An RUF campus minister, church planner, pastor of a large church, leader of a seminary, where a lot of people are getting a great education. Thanks.
Well, Dan, I'm grateful to be here. Thanks for the invitation, and thank you for your contributions in the church, too.
Working with Dan Doriani is a production of the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. We seek to promote faithfulness in the workplace, in education, in discipleship, and in the stories of believers who've applied their faith at work. If you want to put your faith to work and change your corner of the world, visit our website, the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. Look for faithandworkstl.org. That's one word. We'll help you start a cohort with like-minded believers who also want to practice their faith at work. This podcast is donor-supported. To keep us going, please donate on our website. Maybe more importantly, you can support us by listening, by subscribing, by sharing, by liking us, by posting us on your favorite platform, or go old school and tell a friend.